So yeah, we have two the great speakers today who are really going to talk to us about actually turning, I think, a lot of the theory that we've heard about over the last 4 months, I think, into kind of practical, safe spaces, which I think is really exciting, because a lot of the time when you're doing work in responsible tech, it's really easy to point to a theory and research and writing, and actually there aren't a lot of people who are walking the walk. So what we're going to do over the next hour is Caroline is going to speak, and then Hera, and then we'll all have a chat, if that's okay. So Caroline, over to you.
Great, thank you. Wonderful. So I've prepared a presentation. I'm understandable, but also hopefully, like, I don't want to say quick and pace, but because I recognize there are like two speakers here. But so this is, I'll be presenting on a project that I've been working on since about March. Sorry, all of your videos are in this monitor, even though I know the camera is right here. So if I'm ever looking off to the side, it's because this is where Zoom has placed you, which is that way. Anyway, I'll be talking about a project that I've worked on from March to about June or July, that was funded by a Mini-R Network and the Mozilla Foundation. And I was looking at how offline communities have had to sort of switch to being online during the COVID-19 restrictions in different countries. And it was sort of centered around this question of, which sounds very broad, which was, what does a community need? And really what that question actually is asking is, what does a community need to be sustainable online? What is the kind of like infrastructure and tools that they need, as well as just like general best practices, because we're having to create all kinds of new best practices right now. So hi, I'm Caroline. I'm an artist and designer, and I look at online communities, communication, and tech's impacts in society. For almost the past 8 years, I've been studying abusive language, online harassment, social networks, and artificial intelligence. So I've worked with clients like Facebook, Intel, the Wikimedia Foundation, Bandcamp, and others. And as an artist, my work has been shown at the Tate Exchange's Tate Modern, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, Bologna, as well as others. And I'm sure, like a lot of you, when the COVID-19 restrictions and stay-at-home orders were passed in the country I'm staying in, which is Germany, a lot of my life had to really radically shift into being purely digital. And as a researcher, I've already been thinking a lot about how we speak, talk online, and how that can be translated into data. And what you're seeing here are examples of an art project, which is Feminist Data Set, where I hold workshops on how we can use intersectional feminism as a theory and framework for investigating AI and technology. But most of these workshops have been offline. They've been around people, as you can see, in a closed room with no open windows and no face masks on, because this was pre-COVID. And they're very, very tactile. And they're pulling from design theory, so using Post-it notes to help us sort of sort and work through ideas. And I had to transition all of these workshops online. And even as someone who is a millennial and also a technologist that looks at intersectionality and online harassment, even this shift to the purely digital, which is something people would assume I would greet innately, is still one I approached with trepidation, because what are all the different workflows that have to be created? What are all the new and emerging problems that are happening as we are living sort of solely online, but also in our own homes, and having to have things like these small Zoom get-togethers or really big conferences, right? So I've been looking at how creatives and schools and activists are trying to create online spaces for communities, and what can we learn from them. This slide says designers, but it's really generally, what can technologists learn? What can researchers learn? What can community organizers also learn? And so this research, which started in March, which is when the COVID-19 shutdown spread across Europe and the United States, led to this, nearly every facet of our life shifting to the purely digital. And so I interviewed about 28 different practitioners across the United States, the UK, and the EU. This project culminated in a website and toolkit funded by Omidyar Network and with our outreach partner, the Mozilla Foundation. So yeah. And part of the inspiration around this project was this sort of phrase that I saw that kept kind of popping up, which was a lot of fear around COVID-19, which makes complete sense. The world feels like a scary and uncertain place. But I think it's important to remember that the world has always been an uncertain place and also a scary place. Right now, we are facing a kind of catastrophic horror that we've never seen before. And it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be unsure. It's okay to be figuring things out. Not to sound too cloying, but even inside of this really uncertain and scary time, I'm interested in to see what we can learn from this moment. And for me, that's been joining communities and trying to figure out the most sustainable ways to stay in contact with my immediate family, with my friends. We're thinking of these as circles that expand, to acquaintances, and then to the general local and global communities that I'm in. So life is still moving on and we're adapting right now. And our social lives, which feed our emotional lives, are really important to emotional resilience during any kind of trauma or catastrophe. So especially now, our emotional resilience is really important. Which brings me to ask this: how are we creating spaces for interaction and avoiding harm online? And what does that look like? So digital interfaces are the bridges to our communities, especially now. Technology can't fix systemic inequality created by COVID-19, and also the systemic inequality revealed by COVID-19. They can help make connections with our communities better. And right now, a lot of those tools are failing. Some of these tools weren't designed for this kind of use. What I mean is that we are using sometimes business to business software like Zoom, but we're using it in a way to sort of mimic almost like a kind of social media, right? So we're asking tools to expand in a way that they just can't. Tool design can be very narrowly constrained, right? And we're using a tool that was originally designed for enterprise uses only. So we, as community members, engineers, and designers, need to think of ways to create better and more responsible tools so communities can have safety, intimacy, and even delight. So then within this, what does a community need? A community needs intimacy, safety, and support. And within that, they need tools that can be customized to allow for more agency to create different kinds of spaces and community needs. The next few slides will be showing examples of art shows, lectures, of dance parties that are all kind of happening online. So to get to this, where we are right now, even in this meeting, it took a lot of planning, care, and consideration. So to get to where we are right now, we have to be mindful to avoid situations like this one. Zoom bombing, which is a new form of harassment that has popped up during the COVID-19 stay-at-home orders. It's where people take control of a meeting by turning on their audio or their video and saying very harassing things like racial slurs, misogynistic threats, etc. People can also take control of the video and expose themselves or expose harmful content. And a way to combat this is by having the moderator be the only one in control and remove the ability to use or speak or show videos, and also not posting a link online, or also having password protected video conferences. And this is something that even now I've seen a lot of groups really forget to do, that have then resulted in Zoom bombing. So this is something that's not going away. So we could ask ourselves here, where could technology fix this? Zoom, I think when you start a Zoom event now, will nudge people to have a password already. So maybe it's a further form of nudging, right, of actually having it be password protected, and someone has to go and turn that off. But anyway, it's important to think about when we're creating digital gatherings like the one we're in, of are we thinking through how to mitigate all different kinds of harms that could exist in the gathering itself. Our tools have always been imperfect, even before this moment. But now we're seeing the cracks more than ever with things like Zoom bombing, or even if we start to look at, outside of like the digital space, people of color being affected by facial recognition or surveillance technology or higher rates of COVID-19. Or recently, or a few months ago, Zoom announcing it wasn't going to use end-to-end encryption for free accounts to better partner with police departments. And then a few weeks later, due to public outrage, they decided to give everyone free end-to-end encryption. So it's important to look at these examples, not just as random ones, but of decisions that technology designers make and that society make, or rather members of society make when designing and creating the tools we use to engage with each other. So with Zoom bombing, some of the solutions to mitigate it do cut down technically on intimacy building. For example, seeing all of you and being able to interact with all of you makes this a more engaging conversation for all of us. And that's part of the event design of this event. It is smaller. We were all invited here. There is a facilitator. There was someone that curated and organized this. We have a plan for what we're doing for large chunks of what this meeting is, right? Not just anyone can randomly join. And all of that planning really takes time and consideration, right? And this makes this a much more engaging conversation than me pre-recording this talk or me just sort of lecturing to empty black cubes, right? Or just no one. But again, this brings me back to my question of what does a community need in building intimacy? Right now we have some intimacy in this conversation. But what if we wanted to get bigger than the amount of people we had here? Let's look at some examples of communities out in the wild adapting to COVID-19. This is one of my favorites. So we're looking at Bed-Stuy Strong, a mutual aid group. Mutual aid groups are volunteer groups that can help provide supplies, groceries, and support during a time of crisis. This community building effort is able to grow quickly and successfully because participants are already community builders involved in their community. So groups that are already used to building or providing aid are now just sort of shifting that also into a digital space. It was the focus on community and not the individual that allowed for NYC PPE, previously named Last Mile, and Bed-Stuy Strong to come online. NYC PPE delivers 3D fabricated face shields to nurses and doctors all across New York. And then they've had different groups pop up in Boston and I think on Long Island. So these community ties already existed, albeit in less official forms, meaning that the people that were organizing had already kind of known each other or had rather unformalized interactions with each other in terms of volunteering. But when COVID-19 happened, those community ties sort of became more institutionalized, meaning forming WhatsApp groups or creating a Slack or organizing of how to create an inflow to take in materials like face masks to then donate to doctors and nurses. So the technology sprung up around the communities as people went into action to help each other. And these groups are using multiple tools that I have described as being called digitally duct taped together to function, meaning they're using multiple tools with thousands of points of data and many volunteers. So they will track materials on something like Airtable. They're using different Slack channels inside of one Slack community to organize. Those channels only allow certain people into certain channels. And then they're using a general WhatsApp to notify all of the volunteers of what's happening. So they're having to use, again, these different kind of tools, all sort of digitally duct taped together. This is a Bed-Stuy Strong volunteer buying groceries for over 21 neighbors. So Bed-Stuy Strong takes in donations and then delivers free groceries to people in the neighborhood of Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. Bed-Stuy Strong is a digital group that sprung up around to help the neighborhood of Bed-Stuy to support their neighbors during COVID-19 with all different kinds of support, like grocery delivery, social distance check-ins, and even delivering masks and whatnot. The group has physical flyers all over the neighborhood and then instructions on how to join the Bed-Stuy Strong Slack channel to then help coordinate delivery and create spaces of communication during COVID-19 and organize volunteers. They use Slack, Google Voice, and Airtable to help deliveries. So Samantha Garfield, a volunteer with Bedside Strong, gave me an example during the research when I was interviewing different community members of how the group tries to meet and organize with their nearly 3,000 members. So Samantha said, the other day we posted in an all hands meeting where we were looking to get broad-based buy-in on a set of guiding principles for our mutual aid group. And we were really struggling with how we can do that effectively because there might be hundreds of people on the call. And the goal was not just to ask them to thumbs up or thumbs down, but to generally invite hand raisers. So all different levels of possible engagement. So we had a conversation where we were asking people to stack in the Zoom chat. So when you say stack, that means you want to speak. B, asking them to weigh in via a straw poll on Slido. So they would put different things into a poll. And then C, concurrently posting a Q&A on Slido. So everyone could post all their questions. We could upvote and downvote questions. So there were sort of levels to how people could voice their dissent based on how extreme the dissent was. So Garfield was describing this process. So groups need to think through when intaking information and what to do with it and why. What is the point of their group and what are the solutions? Bed-Stuy Strong exists just for Bed-Stuy, not for all of Brooklyn. And they really follow their defined missions. What they accomplish is monumental, and they accomplish it with dedication, organization, and then a focus on fulfilling the mission of their particular group. But they also recognize scale, that they can't and don't want to scale up to all of Brooklyn. They're just focused on their neighborhood. And they even have a guide if other neighborhoods want to do something similar. Another event I attended is called Present. So in March 2020, I spoke to graphic designer, educator, and lecturer Prem Krishnamurthy on his performance lecture series, Present. Present started by happenstance during COVID-19. Prem had planned an exhibition called Polymorph in the University of Connecticut, and it would happen at the end of March, and would be accompanied by a lecture performance essay that he had written that would be distributed online. In mid-March, the show was postponed, and Prem quickly shifted gears because he still wanted to do an event. And so he invited all of the other artists, curators, and lecturers from the show that had been canceled to do cameos on this Zoom event he decided to just create. So what had meant to be a solo performance lecture became a much more inclusive format, where artists could be given the space from the show to do some kind of online engagement. What was meant to be a one-time thing actually turned into almost seven different weekly events. So every Sunday for 7 Sundays in a row, they held Present, and it was different every time. Prem said that so many people said he should keep doing this, and he thought if people were responding to a sense of connectedness, then maybe that's what he should do, that he should just keep doing this. What's interesting about Present is that Prem thinks about tempo and rhythm. So there's a variation of tempo and different kinds of activities. Prem pointed out, at least to him when he's been teaching online, because he's a lecturer, that Zoom time feels twice as long as normal time. So an hour offline can feel like, when you're in Zoom, 1 hour can feel like 2 hours. So he likes to just do different kinds of things. So he'll cut up Present by having maybe a 5-minute film, and then a listening experience, and then a lecture, and then a group guided physical activity, and then a Q&A, and then it always ends with group karaoke. What I like about Present is it shows a way that you have to rethink how to do things online, how you present ideas and give them shape. And Prem's learned to work with Zoom in a particular way and even edit film in Premiere to sort of benefit Present. And he has all this documentation in Google Slides. On another level of it, Prem started to understand questions of scale and community in a different way. The cap isn't who fits into the physical room. It's a different kind of cap when you're on something like Zoom. He hasn't limited the number of participants yet, but there is a natural scale that seems to sort of shape out, and it might be the number of people interested in these things. But he's decided to not cap it until harassment happens, and so far that hasn't happened. What's interesting about Zoom is in the way it highlights the impossibility of having a singular viewpoint. So when Prem records from Zoom, he's receiving a particular version of it. He doesn't know what I would see as a participant. because the top of my screen is always changing of who I see interacting and listening. So he really enjoys seeing people like photograph the hangouts of it. So he can see how we're having all these kind of different experiences. And he says this means we kind of don't have one true experience on Zoom because we're all sort of interacting with it in a slightly different way. Another event I attended was a multi-100-person lecture series held by the data feminism authors, Lauren Klein and Catherine D'Ignacio. What was interesting is you couldn't see anyone but the lecturers, but they would regularly engage in comments, and they were also the moderators. And so they would read things out, but then we had a very engaging, as you can see on the side, like chat window where people would be talking. The moderators and authors did have complete control of the lecture series. So it was much more similar to a structured lecture. But the content was so good. And what I enjoy actually most about this being in Berlin is that this kind of open lecture series never would have happened prior to COVID-19. This would have been in a physical room in Boston where the writers are located. But having this online actually allowed for a much more diverse audience. And the audience was from across the globe, from the EU, India, Malaysia, the US, the UK. So sometimes this shift online actually does create more equity, and it creates a much more diverse audience. And I hope post COVID-19, we can still have these digital spaces and opportunities.
Caroline, sorry, just to jump in here. We're like running a tad late,
Okay,
and that's as much your fault as ours. But yeah, just like a couple more minutes or something.
Yeah, that's fine. I will just quickly run through stuff and I'll get to the takeaways. I also looked at Now Play This, which is an interactive arts and games festival held in London's Somerset House, which then during COVID-19 was canceled and then reinstated to be digital. And the curator, Marie Fulston, was thinking about how do you sort of recreate tangible rituals online. And so what you see here is she built Chris Burden's Urban Lights in Animal Crossing. And so she started using Animal Crossing as this way to sort of bring back in the ritual of traveling to an event. So in Animal Crossing, when you get online, you have to like actually travel via airplane in the game to someone's island. And so this kind of idea of moving to different sized spaces was a way to recreate this this sort of experience you'd have in an actual exhibition because you travel to an exhibition. So she was thinking a lot about how you can use intimacy or how you can use rituals in digital spaces to yield intimacy. So they held panels inside of Animal Crossing that were then presented or streamed through Zoom. Marie was thinking a lot about how do you just sort of avoid things feeling only like a broadcast, so going out. So they held a variety of different kinds of field trips in actual video games. So this panel in Animal Crossing is one of them. Another is this virtual field trip inside of Half-Life 1. So the idea was to go just beyond a regular talk. So there are all these multiplayer games where people can go into the game itself, and these were created as these guided experiences. The field trips are capped at a size so the artist can really engage with participants and other participants can follow along. So takeaways, which brings me to my question of what does a community need? So a community needs intimacy, safety, and support, but really like what are those things? So this is our checklist from the website. People need consistent ways to share media across video platforms. We can look to Slack, which has the ability to drag and drop across any part of the tool interface. On Zoom, you can only really drag into the chat window, and then it's a particular part of the window, right? You can't easily share media on Google Hangouts. So people need more ways to share, but they also need more intimate ways to have conversations in these spaces. So in Zoom, we have breakout rooms. We have the ability to message each other one-on-one. This ability to pair off and create smaller areas of engagement is important. But people also need customization. So many creators, school educators, and event planners mentioned wanting a dashboard to like better import audio or to line up speakers. And what they actually really needed is a broadcasting tool because we're using Zoom as a way to broadcast. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize this was a video, but here you go. So yeah, the TLDR of that is consistent ways to share media, ways to create smaller conversations in the platform, customization, etc. And a lot of this is because we're using Zoom like a conferencing tool, like a social network, and a TV station, as well as a place to have intimate conversations all at the same time. And so the tool does need to reflect that. And most video conferencing tools need to reflect that now as well. But there's also a human element, right? People are like, so there are tools and tricks people will create even when the best tools fail. They're creating workarounds like engaging or creating in digital duct taping. So that's when they're using tools like Slack and Google Docs and Zoom to create a workflow for their communities. Some schools are using Zoom, email, Google Docs, Slack, GitHub, Arena, Pinterest for assignments, or for knowledge sharing or for talks. One tool isn't sufficient enough, but integration across all of them could be helpful. Another thing people are creating is what's called a plan or run of show. So time in Zoom feels so much longer, but even with better tools, a host still needs a plan of knowing who is speaking, when, prepared questions, etc. And from this run of show, attendees also need guidance. So many users mentioned being thrown into breakout rooms, but were given no clarity or warning. So tell your attendees in the beginning what is going on and what the plan is. A tool or an interface can help with showing the breakout groups or time, but a host still needs to outline like what is actually going on. One of the last ones is the idea of tangible rituals. So asking attendees to hold up a piece of paper or having everyone engage in a breathing exercise together. Sometimes the most intimate acts online aren't the UI we put in the tool, but the exercises we can do apart but together. So just that, all that listed out: digital duct taping, a planner, run a show, a guide for attendees, and tangible rituals. But remember that this isn't a one-to-one offline, and no tool can reflect that. But what we can make is different, and it'll have to be that way. But maybe in it being different, we can find ways to be exploratory. Marie and Prem both brought up refiguring their own expectations, and I think that's true here. It's a different kind of medium. We interact with the screen differently. There may be similarities. We still have to yield to the limitations of the medium, or at least incorporate them. It's also important to acknowledge that harassment happens everywhere. The tools may not allow for harassment moderation. This is a direct call out to Google Hangouts. Why don't you have any kind of moderation? But until all tools have harassment UI, like the ability to mute or block someone, or hide someone in the chat, or hide them from you, even with these, events still need things like a code of conduct and a plan, and platforms still need harassment policies, which Zoom hadn't thought about until the highly publicized Zoom bombing started happening in March and April. So much like having a physical event where you'd ask these questions, or I hope you would, like I hope you'd have a code of conduct, you especially need these for online gatherings. And people need to realize that harassment happens everywhere on every platform. And in any instance where one person can talk to one person, or 5 people, or 1,000 people. We also need to think about the power dynamics at play. Power dynamics play a lot in group communication. Prem mentioned an example of a professor starting a Telegram group. Well, what are the controls in that group? What are the social dynamics? Technically, like code-wise, students could say whatever they wanted in Telegram. There are a few moderation controls, but there isn't things like keyword blocking when you're inside a group. But students know that their professor is in the Telegram channel, and that's where the social and power weight of the professor and what the professor means outside the channel weighs in, meaning they can't actually say anything because the professor controls their grades. So the control exists in society, and we imprint that control onto social networks and the digital. One thing I've been thinking about is, what does it mean to yield to intimacy? And how, when we say intimacy, what do we think? What does that mean? Intimacy can be planned, even if that sounds counterintuitive. For example, unstructured chaos doesn't really work on Zoom because Zoom is a structured place. So what feels enjoyable to users may be what we could call a curatorial weight, or planning and care and consideration. It's important to point out that even when things can feel structureless or formless, maybe like if we're looking at activist meetups or anarchist meetups or non-hierarchical communities, they actually still have a structure on how to hold a meeting and how to speak to each other in a group setting. So this is sort of advocating for the idea of having some rules to help us yield to the greatest form of intimacy. And again, to reset our expectations, we have to rethink scale. We have to rethink slowness. Another conference I was attending wrote to participants and suggested we move at the speed of trauma-informed trust. In other words, slow. Scale, slowness, size, expectation, they're all related. Marie talked about letting go of audience number expectations when designing for intimacy online. So what did success mean for Now Play This? Perhaps it wasn't thousands of page views, it's also the kind of intimacy they could create. For example, if Now Play This had a physical talk and 30 people came and filled the room, wouldn't that be a form of success? So with this shift online, Marie is letting go of the need for there to be thousands of views. What she says is it that we don't need more content, but our asks of what the content needs to shift? So instead of the shift of one to many, we could be shifting to the intimacy of one to a few or one to one, which we see already in this gathering.
Caroline, can we wrap up? Because I'm just
I'm
questions.
actually done.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Oh, look at that last slide. Thank you. Let's give you a little round of applause. Thank you very much. Great. Let's just hand straight over to Hera, who I know a few people know already, or at least know of. So I will let you introduce yourself if that's okay. And thank you, Caroline. Are you okay to hang around for a bit? I've lost you. Yes.
I could probably stay for a few minutes on, but I do have a call that's supposed to go right. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. Thank you. Hera.
Okay, great. Yeah, I will kick off, and don't worry, I can be pretty quick. So a lot of you know me and have access to me outside of this. So I will just rush through some things that might be interesting examples. No worries. Let me just make sure that I can share my screen with you all. So awesome. Okay, we are here. So I am the founder of Chayn, which is a global volunteer-led network that creates intersectional online resources for survivors of gender-based violence. I started this in 2013. At that time, feminist tech was basically just harassment mapping. Harassmap had been around for maybe a year or two, and I was very inspired by it. And it was just really the beginning of feminists kind of using technology to think about gender-based violence. So dissuaded by my experience as a young person of trying to help two people close to me get out of abusive marriages in the UK and Pakistan, where I'm from, I just went over like charity websites, and they were terrible. And that's literally the only way of saying it. The charities websites have come a long way, but it was a terrible experience as a user. And I just thought, wow, this has to be better. And I had been spending a lot of time with the Wikimedia Foundation as a volunteer, and just very embedded in the social entrepreneurship, tech, and sort of tech for good movements. So I decided to bring all my learning from that as a 23-year-old, and decided to start Chayn, and wanted to be survivor-led. So Chayn runs with volunteers. I only went full-time in July, and up to 70% of our volunteers are survivors. So what I'm going to show to you today is how do you bake trauma-informed design into technology and take a slow tech approach, because that's what Chayn does. So I will show you some principles of how we run, and some products that we've created and some particular design decisions that we've made, which have, I've been told by some very professional UX designers, makes absolutely no sense, but it works for a community. So the Chayn is a global resource, which means that we're working in 11 languages. It's pretty much, after the UN, it's the only organization that works on gender-based violence on a global level. So it's a very tough challenge to work on that. So let's start off with a website. So through many iterations, what I came to realize is that actually survivors, when they're looking, a website is a woman crying. It's usually a white woman, black eye, someone's trying to punch down. And it's a very triggering image. And when someone is in distress, because of their like mental health or their whatever is happening in their life, they are bringing a lot of trauma with them and a lot of pain with them into your website. So instead of like reminding them of the pain, we take it away. So I think of like designing tech as designing a cafe. I want people to look at my cafe, stand outside and say, wow, that looks like a really cool place. I want to go inside. This looks like a place I can chill in. And that's literally the way we design everything. So when they go in, there needs to be different kinds of seatings for them to sit. So let's say maybe someone wants to like stand and like have a cup of tea standing. Someone may want to sit with people. So someone might want to, sit there for hours. Someone might want to be there only for a few minutes for like a coffee to go. These are the kind of thinking that makes it easy to design like an experience that works for different kinds of users. So for example, if someone only has 15 minutes because their partner is out and they can use the mobile to find a shelter near them, you absolutely do not want them to click 20, 30 spaces, like places to get to it. The Women's Aid website, the last time I checked, which is for the UK, it took 20 clicks or 15 clicks to get to a page where you can find shelters near you. If you happen to be like someone like me, I'm from Pakistan, but I live in the UK, or someone who has multiple identities, you want to make it easier for them to find information in their home, in their mother tongue and the host language, something for their own country and the country they're living in. So this chatbot that we designed as a dumb chatbot does exactly that. So it allows them, straight up tells you it's a cat, not a human. You tell it which language you want to speak in, and then gets your consent, and then basically asks you what it can do. So you can go through it afterwards. It's on the Chayn website, and basically it allows you to say, I'm from Pakistan and I'm living in the UK. Give me all the information you can give me on like domestic abuse. So it'll pool all of Chayn's links from the UK and Pakistan, or Urdu and all of the Pakistani languages and English, and give it to them in one place. So it's a reading list generator. So it's not actually for chatting. And I think it's been a very effective tool at that. It's still not perfect. And I'd be happy to talk about why, what are the things that are wrong with it. And then on the homepage, like the number one feedback that we get from survivors is, your website does not make me depressed. When I come to it, I want to linger. I want to stay on. I want to keep going. And that's so important, that designing for hope is the most important thing when you're designing for a disadvantaged group, because they've got a lot of stuff that they carry with them. You don't want to add things to them. You want them to either leave that or be able to sit with it, but without discomfort. Some examples of the kind of stuff that we've done to make things inclusive. So we only used to be, so we do guides, platforms, and services. I'm going to give example of one of each. So as an example of a guide, this one is manipulation is abuse. And this was one of the first ones that we did, where the gender of the person reading it is basically, it's not gender non-specific, which is very hard to do if you're used to working in a very like gender conforming ways. And that took us a year to achieve. But if you go down, it doesn't really take anything away from the experience people have. Oh, wait a second, I just realized I showed you the wrong guide. I want to show you the other one. This one is a good example as well, but I'm going to show you the other one, which is one of my favorite examples. Yes. So this one is about online safety. We started it a few years ago, 5 years ago, I think. And at that time, the only information on online safety was for journalists and activists. So we spent a year putting this guide together, and then we put it out for comment for survivors, and basically got 0 comments. So as a joke, I made this cat you see in the middle. We put this cat on our Facebook page, public Facebook page, saying, the cat wants our security kitty wants your feedback. We got 70 comments in 1 week. Nothing in the document had changed. It was just the way we talked about it, because it was so heavy as a topic for them to engage in. Like, they didn't really understand what we meant by online safety. So by using cat puns, we just interested them enough for them to open it. We got so many feedback. So then we kind of just flew with it. And as you'll see in this guide, it's available in 9 languages, and it's full of cat memes. Another service that we have is soul medicine. So we do lots of long guides, but we chop them up into small pieces as micro courses for survivors who have PTSD and may have issues with like getting information, a lot of information at the same time. So it's the same content that you would find as a full guide, but we've just sliced it up in different ways. And we don't force users to sign up for an account, which is really bad, trust me, when you're trying to apply for grants, because you can't prove how many people use it. But by giving people that agency, because racism, gender-based violence, any kind of like ism takes your agency away from you. And if your product can bring it back to their life, it is really empowering for them. So in this soul medicine, for instance, there are different courses, they're available in different languages, and people have the choice to either sign up for an account and receive it in their inbox, and they can customize the email by saying, I only want this email to come between 12 and 4 o'clock because that's a safe time for me, or that's the time that I like. And I want you to send it to me with fake subject lines like 99 ways Beyonce rules the world. And that's really isn't a bulletproof protection, but it's just enough protection if someone's peering over your shoulder. Because we know like in the spouse surveillance is a real thing, and also not just spouse, family members. Another like thing that we did that was quite quirky with this, which I'm really happy to share, is you'll see that when you go to these courses, you can read them. They're all open. All of the stuff Jen does is openly licensed. If I click on this, let's say this is a second note, and you will see all the languages in here, and you will not believe the amount of fights I had to make this happen, because all of our service designers were like, this is bad UX. Why do you have it there? Someone might not want to engage with it. But our project lead, who was a refugee, and myself, as having helped a lot of women of color in the UK, our experience was when you're going to the lawyer and you're trying to explain your situation, you want to understand what's happening to you sounds like in English and what it sounds like in your own language, because you're trying to interpret the law in your own like language as well. So being able to see them side by side was just very, very important. So we kind of steamrolled it and did it, and we've had a really good feedback from people about this. So you can see, in a way, it's like bad design, because we're exposing people to languages they might not need. We are not locking this under any like accounts, so anyone can access it. So in a way, anyone can do it, but that's totally cool with us. So that's just what we want. We want people to be able to access it. Now, my second last example is going to be YSM, which is for survivors of sexual violence. And this took us a very long time to develop. And one of the cool features about this is that I would like to share is when you look through it, you'll see that we actually grouped together different kinds of resources into different themes. And we spent a long time thinking about how we phrase those themes. We've actually linked to things that we've not built in it as well. But the way the content moves through different parts of this app, and I can share the link afterwards, is very different to any of our other projects. We have purposefully made it really, really simple. You see no color on the screen apart from this, because we wanted them to focus on the actual like words. If I look through this one, if you click on a particular theme, by signing up for an account, the only thing that happens is you can save this. So this is open as well, but you'll see that it kind of takes people through each step. So it encourages them to go and step forward. But if they want to take a break, they can actually click and get a very simple grounding exercise, and it helps. So this is an experiment to see like how people engage with this. And this is based on the feedback we got from running an in-person course. And my last example is going to be Bloom, which is something we developed in COVID-19. And this is probably like the best example of digital duct taping that Caroline was talking about, because man, this project came together in 3 days. We came up with an idea on Saturday, and Monday we announced we were doing this. And then we had to we told them that we gave ourselves 1 week to figure out how to run it. And then thanks to a grant from the National Lottery Community Fund, we were able to like make it better. And I'm going to show you an example of digital duct taping here, which is that I would have loved to run this. So this is a remote trauma support. So we record these YouTube videos, which are about 5 different kind of trauma subjects. People get those videos, and after each video, there is a homework and a self-reflective exercise they're supposed to do. They do it, they send it to us via a live chat, a separate like live chat. And then we incorporate the feedback and the comments and their homeworks into the next video. So it's a very, very rapid prototyping and like respond, like we have to be very reactive. We can't pre-record things. Now, the interesting thing about this is, here's like the journey map, but the interesting thing about this one is that we wanted to just offer it on Telegram because it's the safest option by creating a channel. People can't see each other and it allows people to talk to us. But 80% of our audience wanted to sign up for WhatsApp, and WhatsApp is a pain to work with. But because that's where our audience is, we had to be there. So we provided this whole like service via WhatsApp and Telegram, even though it would be so much easier if we just did WhatsApp, but just did Telegram. We had that agency because for some people, you know, oftentimes we assume that safety is a big issue. For the people that we are doing this course for, 75% of them do not live with abusers. So safety was not an issue for them. They were happy to use WhatsApp. So we went with WhatsApp because that's an app that they use. For the 15% that prefer Telegram, we had the option for Telegram. It doubles the work in some ways, but it's worth it because these people are like, you know, it's this whole principle of meeting where the users are. I'm out of time, so I will be happy to answer questions about what Bloom is and how it went. Here's like some of the courses that we did. We support 600 people in 4 months, and yeah, we're scaling this over the next 3 months.
Now I'm going to hand over straight away because I'm just aware of the time. We have 8 minutes until 12, and I'm just wondering, do any of the fellows have any questions or comments or points they would like to put to speakers? Vimla.
Hey Hera. It's all amazing. Like it's an incredible journey that you've been on. Like how particularly with Bloom and starting so quickly, but like how did you get in front of the people who needed help? What was the kind of the community building element of it like?
For the first one, where we had to do it very rapidly, we only had 100 people on it, and it was us. We asked a few partners of ours in the UK, so Safe Lives, Women's Aid. In the US, we had another partner. In Pakistan, we used, we asked our the people that we work with, the Human Rights Foundation, to share it, and that's how we got the 100 people and just our own followers. With the second, with Bloom. With the way it is right now, we aimed for 300 people. That was our target for our grant, but we reached 600. And one of the massive differences that came where in one day we had 250 people sign up because of influencers shared it. So it was crazy. We had to process 250 people in 2 days. And it takes us about 4 minutes to process one person. It took us forever. We all had to work till 2 a.m. to get people in. But yeah, that really taught us how important it is, because those were people who had never engaged with Chayn, most of them had never engaged with any organization at all, and had been history of child sexual abuse that they had never disclosed to anyone. They were experiencing domestic abuse in their current life, or they had recently experienced sexual assault and it was really impacting their day-to-day life. These people really needed help, and could not afford a therapist. So it was really good that we were able to reach that influencer, and they were really good at sharing about the project. So that's become a part of our strategy now, that we've kind of identified people who have audiences that will probably never search for this, but they need it.
Any other questions or comments? Questions for Caroline, who I think has a hard stop very shortly.
I just wanted to say to Caroline, actually, I really like the point you made about thinking of scale, especially around the neighborhood, because it's such a thing in, shall we say, more tech-oriented thing around how can you scale this, and actually what people need sometimes is not scale, but just to have, you know, something for themselves within a specific sort of location. But of course, that also affects, if it affects you, you know, how are you able to fund it? Because sometimes the scale comes with funding. So I thought it's really an important point that you sort of highlighted there. I think for Hera, I mean, some of so many things, sort of points that you raised. Really important point about the experience of people when you're talking about the UX designer saying no, you know, really you shouldn't have it this way, and it was so important. And I think I see people talking about that now, people with real life experiences heading things, how important that is, and also designing for hope. But I just wanted to ask around, is it only online? Do you ever do, you know, things offline, or link, you know, link to maybe workshops or other things that offline in other places?
Pretty much never. We work like, I mean, we will amplify any work that any organization is doing in person, but it's so hard for like me to do that. I'm the only employee. Well, we have a half employee as well, but all our like volunteers are in different places, and it's, I guess it's just the way Chayn has like evolved. The people who want to volunteer for Chayn want to volunteer for Chayn because it's only online. So it's really hard to do anything offline. So, and I kind of like, I just have accepted it, that that's the kind of thing that we are, you know, everyone has a role to play in combating like gender-based violence. We're just not the people to do it in person, and we'll just support, and we'll be the first point of call for people, and then send them to organizations that are local to them.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I think we've got time for one more. Anybody? Terry.
Yeah, my question's pretty simple, actually. You mentioned, I thought it was really interesting when you mentioned how online events can feel as if they're taking twice as long as normal events. I find that really fascinating, and will be really useful going forward. You mentioned having rules, kind of house rules at the start of Zoom meetings. How do you kind of toe the line between treating people as adults and kind of at the same time putting some kind of format in place? I think sometimes that can feel like a difficult balance to kind of strike.
Totally. Thank you so much for that question. I think one thing to keep in mind is unless you are in like a very small group where you've already known each other for a while, we have to sort of create rules, but there are already rules without thinking of it. So imagine if we, Terry, were like friends offline, and we invited 2 other friends we knew to like a digital like beer tasting, right? And so it's like 4 of us on Zoom. Because we already know each other, we already have a sense of like what are appropriate and inappropriate things to say to each other, because we have like societal norms, right? And then we have like the norms of our friendship group. So maybe like if I had just gotten fired or something, you would all know to maybe ask me about it based off my personality to see like how I was doing. But you wouldn't say something like, how did you screw up at work, Caroline? Do you know what I mean? Because like we already have a candor and camaraderie, but there's already like societal rules in place that we adhere to, right? And so based off of that, we're already actually engaging with a form of structure, even if it's unacknowledged, right? Like if I were presenting to you in a physical room, if you didn't like my presentation, you probably wouldn't like flip a table and leave, right? So we already have these constraints is one thing I just want to point out. And then adding like additional acknowledgement is more just actually outlining like what the space will explicitly allow and disallow for. And I find that to be extremely helpful in terms of when you're engaging with people that you don't know, what are we all agreeing to do? So some of those rules may be saying something like stack as opposed to just unmuting and interrupting someone. Or maybe that's a norm, right? That's defined in the meeting where it's like, if you have a question, please interrupt me. Like, don't let me go on, right, if I'm speaking. But generally, I would argue that most community meetups, offline or online, need a code of conduct. They need a structure. And some of that is like, we shouldn't make assumptions about what people know and don't know, right? And we shouldn't make assumptions around like what is considered appropriate or inappropriate. So a lot of my research work comes from looking at online harassment and then different communities that engage in digital spaces, as well as technical communities that engage offline. And so like I look at harassment in open source communities as well, and then like tech communities and like how they meet offline and what do they do in those offline spaces. So some codes of conduct, for example, have rules where you shouldn't really make a joke about someone's technical choices. So like Mac versus PC, right? Or like someone's perceived technical knowledge. So jokes like, so easy, even my mom could do it, in some places breaks a code of conduct, which makes sense, right? Because we can start to then build other more explicit rules around like microaggressions, right? Around hyper-specific like bias and, you know, like racial or misogynistic like terms. So I think it's helpful to have a code of conduct which should outline these things, which is like, you know, we have general rules, which is like raise your hand, or we have a Q&A, don't interrupt people, and then like don't engage in these things. But the reason it's important to have all these, and I'll try to wrap up really quickly, is anything can happen in a space, right? Like anything can happen in a physical space or an online space. And so when you're running an event, what are you going to do when something happens, right? Like if you have a plan for what happens when someone doesn't have an internet connection, if you have a plan for what happens when someone doesn't ask a question during the Q&A, right? Like I'm sure Rachel and Casey had some like questions ready just in case all of y'all maybe just didn't feel like talking today, right? But what's the plan you have when someone physically assaults another attendee? Or what's the plan you have when someone says something like that's inappropriate, right? And then even the word inappropriate, what do you do inside of that word, right? What are all the things? Like what's your escalation? In like community design, there's a term I really like called the ladder of consequences or the ladder of escalation. So all different actions can have different extremes of seriousness to them, which means you have to have a different response to different kinds of actions, right? So punching someone in the face is very different than maybe making a joke that it's so easy your mom could do it. One, like hitting someone could result in immediate bouncing right from a space, maybe being permanently banned. Another may require like gently pulling someone to the side, not embarrassing them, pulling them to the side and explaining how that broke your code of conduct, like why that wasn't appropriate, and outlining rules you're going to do next. So code of conduct is like the first step really in actually building a governance structure, and then teaching everyone that's volunteering with you, like this is what we're going to do in every situation, because that does really need to be defined. So when we talk about needing structure in digital spaces, this is also what I mean is you need to have a plan, right? Because that helps protect you and your volunteers and your attendees so you know what to do. Like if your internet went out, Terry, and you were hosting, hopefully like another volunteer participant would be like, that's okay. We know who's supposed to be speaking next. I'm going to take over until Terry comes back, right? Like, so maybe that other person has your phone number to be like, are you okay? Like, how's your internet, right? That's a plan. And we need to like have those similar plans for when things potentially go wrong, like harassment, toxicity, or just anything. So that's what I like about codes of conduct. They also sort of signal to other people that, hi, I as an organizer, I will step in and do something if someone makes you feel uncomfortable, because I've agreed to implement this code of conduct and we've all agreed to try to follow it.
Just very quickly, does do your findings also come from looking at social media and some of the mistakes in terms of not regulating in the past, and how that's impacted people, as well as COVID and Zoom and things like that?
Totally. So I have a pretty varied background, but I've been looking at online harassment in places like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. I used to work on the Wikimedia Foundation's anti-harassment team, and I've like worked with different organizations specifically on harassment related research. So like Amnesty International, I worked with them a little bit on their Twitter toxicity report. I'm currently working with the Carter Center on how they can like look at harassment that journalists face, and female politicians, like what they face on different platforms. And so what I help people think through is like, what are the policy gaps? And then also, how do you just name different kinds of harassment? So like, if we're going to study or gather data on harassment, how do we like look at it? The interest in communities I have is just because I often end up working with different communities. And so the previous research I was talking about with codes of conduct just comes from the fact that like I volunteer a lot in digital open source communities. And then I had a grant from the Ford Foundation to look at harassment mitigation techniques run by this JavaScript meetup group that actually has a lot of diversity in terms of conference organizers as well as conference speakers, and how have they mitigated toxicity and what have they learned.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rachel, you're on mute.
Sorry, I had a lot of things happening in the household, so I had to turn things off. So I think it's the time to say thank you to Caroline and Hera. Maybe we can turn on the volume on and give everyone a round of applause. I think that's nice. Thank you. Thanks a lot. That was really, there was loads there. Let's have a break now for 10 minutes, if that's okay. I know we're all slightly behind today, but if we come back at 12 to 17, is that good with everyone? Great. Okay. And thank you, Caroline and Hera. It was brilliant.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, great.